All right, I'm going to quickly go over the overview of evolution and some things you might see under MCA. I'm going to apologize for my voice. I am on the brink of losing my voice. So, before 1850, a lot of people believed that Earth was formed by supernatural events and that it never changed, that it was perfect in its form, that it was very young, only a few thousand years old, um, and that each species was made to fit its environment and that they never changed and did not go extinct. And when we started to, dig into Earth and we come across fossils, they'd come across these fossils of animals that did not exist at that present time. And so, like, obviously, there's some holes associated with some of these that, you know what, maybe species do change and they can go extinct. So this is Charles Darwin, and when he was a young man, um, he wanted to, he didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. He kind of dabbled in everything, religion, science, math. I mean, he wanted to be a doctor, um, but then he realized that the sight of blood made him faint, so that would not be a very good thing to be, to have if you're going to become a doctor. So he's like, okay, I'm going to go to school and be a minister. And believed that species never changed and that Earth was about 6,000 years old. Well, he started to think maybe that's not the case. Okay, in his life, when he didn't know what he wanted to do, he's like, okay, my dad was a minister, my grandpa's a minister, I'm going to be a minister. And his friend, who was like the captain of the HMS Beagle's like, hey, you know what? Why don't you just come with me on this voyage and just like keep me company and have these intellectual conversations with me, because I can't really do that with my crewmates because he's captain. So Darwin decided to, yeah, you know what? I'm going to put us aside this decision and I'm going to go on this 5-year journey, figure out what I want to do, and be the unofficial naturalist on this ship. And that's what he did. He went on a 5-year voyage around the world, and these are the places that he stopped and visited. And along the way, he started to notice differences, especially among these group of islands called the Galapagos Islands. And so when you notice differences in a species, you call it variation, differences in physical traits of an individual from other individuals in that group to which it belongs. So these are all examples of variation. Monarch butterfly wings, okay, patterns there, a giraffe, coding. And he looked specifically on one island, and he noticed that the species on that island looked different from the nearby species. And a lot of the island species kind of resembled one type from the mainland. And so maybe this isolation allowed these species to diversify or speciate out and, become more adaptable to their habitat. So some of these differences seemed well suited to their environment as well as their diet. So here are the Galapagos finches with their beak sizes. And he also noticed tortoise shell, how tortoises that lived on certain islands had long necks. And when you looked at the vegetation there was very tall, whereas tortoises with short necks tend to hang out in marshy areas. So they were well suited for their environment. So here are some of the examples. Saddleback tortoises with long necks and legs live in areas with tall plants. Dome tortoises, short neck, short legs, lived in wet areas with mosses and short plants. Finches with thick, strong beaks lived in areas with large, hard-shelled seeds. And those that had the thin, delicate beaks lived where there were softer things like insects and fruit. So if an organism has a trait, or a feature that allows them to thrive better in their environment or better survive their environment, we call it an adaptation. And over time, it can cause a population to change, okay? So this is a finch, okay, looking at beak depth. And Peter and Rosemary Grant, two naturalists, scientists, have visited the Galapagos Islands for over the last 40 years right now. And they capture all of the birds on these islands. And they tag them and they weigh them and they measure their beak and wing length and they figure out how many offspring they had. They know the full profile of every single finch on the Daphne Island. And so this is their data. So this graph is showing the average beak depth, okay, of Daphne birds back in 1976. And the sample size is 751, okay? And then 2 years later, it suffered a drought. So all of the thin, hard seeds like disappeared. So all that was left were the big ones, hardly any vegetation. And we notice a shift in the average mean beak depth, okay, based on environmental changes, showing that species do change over time. So some examples of adaptations, traits that allow them to thrive in their environment. You can take a look at a polar bear, how it has 3 eyelids, okay? One kind of transparent one that can cover its eyes as it's swimming in the ocean. Nostrils can close when it swims. Their hair is clear and hollow, and air is an insulator. So when you cut the hair and look at it from the inside, it's actually hollow. Okay, the skin underneath that white fur is black to help absorb radiation. All right, so all of these are adaptations that allow the polar bear to thrive in its environment. So after his 5-year voyage, Darwin came back home, and he spent more than 20 years conducting his own research, okay? And he's like, you know what? Species, they don't stay constant. They can change. He spent time comparing domesticated plants and animals, how the domesticated species showed variation in traits not shown in the wild relatives, and that he's like, well, if breeders can select for certain traits and produce great diversity, could nature do the same thing? Like, if I'm a dog breeder and, I want this one trait in this one dog and another trait in the other, and I can breed them together and try to enhance that one trait, could nature do the same thing? Okay. Yeah, we can. I mean, as humans, we can. We call this artificial selection. This is a wild cow. This is a beef cow. Okay, this is a wild carrot. This is a modern carrot. This is wild corn. This is what modern corn looks like. Here's a natural peach. Here's an artificial peach. Wild wheat. Improved wheat. Pigs. Okay? We do this with chickens, horses, even foxes. Okay? We domesticate animals. We can breed for certain traits. So we call this artificial selection, where humans change a species by breeding it with certain traits. So we select the trait. So we are the selective agent. We determine which traits are favorable. And in order for artificial selection to work, that trait has to be heritable. It has to be able to be passed on to parent to offspring. Darwin kept pigeons, and he bred them for their variety. Okay, these are all from, I forget what it's called, Rockwell stock pigeon. I don't know, it's a rock pigeon. I think it's called a rock pigeon. And just by breeding a certain trait over many generations, you can get a wide diversity of traits. Okay, a lot of the vegetables, cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, kale, kohlrabi, are derived from wild mustard plants. We just select certain traits in the wild mustard plants and we get a different vegetable. We've done this with dogs. All dogs have the common ancestor of the gray wolf. So with artificial selection, we select the traits. And if that feature was undesirable, we didn't select that trait. That trait would be selected against. And Darwin knew that it could take several generations for that breeder to produce that variation observed. So could nature do the same thing? Could the environment create some kind of selective pressure that determined if the trait would be passed on to the offspring or not? So we call that natural selection. Okay, so artificial selection is human-driven. Natural selection is nature, a mechanism by which individuals that have inherited a beneficial adaptation produce more offspring than other individuals who don't have that adaptation. So therefore, the characteristics are selected only if it gives an advantage to the individuals in the environment as it is right now. Because if that organism dies, well, it's not going to reproduce, and those traits that it had die with it. So he's like, you know what? These animals, they're out in the wild. They are competing for resources. They're competing for so many resources, competing against so many organisms, whether they know it or not. And so if they have a slight advantage, it's going to benefit them so that they can get energy to go on and reproduce. So there are 4 main principles of natural selection: variation, overproduction, adaptation, and descent with modification. So variation means that there has to be slight differences between individuals and that these variations have to be heritable. Okay? They have to be able to be passed on to the offspring. Overproduction means it has many offspring to increase its chance of survival. Adaptation means that the variation actually has a benefit. And then descent with modification are the results. You end up with a population that has these adaptations that are well suited for survival and are able to respond to their environment. So here's an example of natural selection in jaguars. Okay, I'll start with variation. So some jaguars, like Jaguar 1, may be born with slightly larger jaws and teeth due to natural variation. Some variations are heritable. Jaguars with their larger jaws and teeth are able to eat shelled reptiles. These jaguars are likely to survive longer and leave more offspring than jaguars that eat only mammals. So they go on and they have offspring. And then over time, we see jaguars with large teeth and jaws as heritable traits. Okay, and the jaguar has adapted this because their environment has changed. Jaguars were not always kind of in that swampy, marshy jungle area. It was more dry, more arid, larger mammals. But then their climate started to change and they had to adapt to a new food source. Okay, reptiles. Other examples of natural selection, antibiotic resistance in bacteria. Okay, mutations happen in bacteria. They can pick up resistance against antibiotics. They go on to reproduce asexually. They pass on that trait. And now we're seeing more and more bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. Pesticide resistance, DDT in insects. Right now, Roundup Ready is not working as efficiently as it should. Okay, the insects have mutated. Okay, and so the chemicals don't knock them out as bad. So now you have to do a combination of different sprays to get rid of insects. Peppered moths in industrial areas. So in an unpolluted environment, moths that are light in color blend in nicely with the lichen, where those that have melanic pigmentation don't. But if you put them in a polluted environment, you see a switch where most moths are melanic pigmentation and fewer are white because they stick out to predators and get picked off by birds. So that's what this is, showing how before the Industrial Revolution, light moths blend in with the tree bark, and there were like 99% of moths were light in color. But then when the Industrial Revolution happened, we saw a flip and how there was 99% dark pigmentation because it was an advantage to be camouflaged. This is showing the Galapagos Islands with the finches, okay, showing how beak size increased due to a different food source. Okay, so population decreases because of that drought, decline in seed supply. This is showing the beak depth, how the beaks got bigger. Okay, and this is the heritability. So beak size is heritable. Okay, there is a correlation with that. If a mom finch and a dad finch, they both have large beaks, they're going to pass on that trait, and the offspring will have even larger beaks. There's this really cool game called Who Wants to Live a Million Years, but it doesn't work anymore with Flash Player, so. All right, so evolution means change over time. And what Charles Darwin contributed to evolution was the mechanism for how organisms change over time. People knew animals changed over time, but they couldn't describe how. So this is where evidence for it comes into play. Fossils, proof that animals do change over time. Archaeopteryx, first bird. Okay, horses used to just have one toe. Used to have multiple toes, and now they just have one toe. Whales still have remnant hip bones. The point of this is Earth is old, life is old, and life on Earth has changed. And the fossil records, yes, they help, but our fossil record will never ever be complete because of geologic processes. Geography. Island plant and animals look alike, but not identical to species found on South America. So at some point, animals had to migrate to islands from the mainland. We see this with the finches. They look like mainland finches, but they're different. Fruit flies of Hawaii, each fruit fly on each island is a little bit different. There's actually hundreds of fruit fly species on the Hawaiian Islands because of that geography isolation. Okay, these are camels, the family camel. showing the migration, how it probably started in Africa, they migrated out. But again, variations, different species. They are all distantly related. Large birds, emus, kiwis, cassowary, ostrich, rhea. Looking at armadillos and anteaters. Okay, large, oh my god, I don't want to say rodents, I was going to say mammals. Similar, but yet different. Embryology is another piece of evidence for evolution, showing that we all share a common descent. Similar features in embryos suggest that they evolved from a distant ancestor. Okay, these are all the beginning stages of animal development, and this is their endpoint. But early in the development history, they all look really, really similar. They all have pharyngeal slits. Okay, they all have this postanal tail. If you take a look at these two embryos, one of them is a cat and the other one's a human, and I don't know which one's which. They look pretty darn similar to me. So just showing similarities that yes, we share a common ancestor. It doesn't mean that we came from one animal or the other. We shared a common ancestor and we went our own way on that evolutionary pathway. Anatomy, analogous features versus homologous. Analogous means that all of these animals have streamlined appendages that help them swim. Okay, so that's their job. That job is to make it more streamlined in the water so they have a similar function. But when you take a look at the anatomy, fish, they have cartilage. Birds are different from mammals. Okay, warm-blooded, different bones, all that stuff. So this is analogous, different structure, same function. Homologous means different job or different function, same structure. A human, cat, whale, bat, we all have a humerus bone, a radius, an ulna, phalanges, carpals, you name it. We have the same bones, but they have evolved to do different jobs. There's animals with different structures on the surface, but when you look underneath that skin, it tells this evolutionary story of common ancestry. We also have vestigial structures that we have that no longer are beneficial for whatever reason. So like remnant pelvic bones in whales. Snakes actually have a femur and a pelvis, some species do. We have a lot of features that are useless, okay? Like, oh my gosh, why am I blanking on a common wisdom teeth? Okay, we don't need wisdom teeth anymore. We all live to be long age and, go to the dentist and take care. We have better hygiene so we don't die, young anymore. Appendix, why do we have an appendix? So there are some features that really don't serve a purpose anymore. And the fifth one is molecular and genetics, looking at DNA sequences between different animals and comparing them. And the more similar the sequence just suggests that we are more closely related. So looking at amino acids of hemoglobin, if we look at humans, compared to rhesus monkeys, there's only 8 amino acid differences, 27 amino acids, and differences in mice. Okay, this is showing genes. Yeah, we share like 99.5% of the same genes with chimps, but that doesn't mean that we came from monkeys. It just means we shared a common ancestor, and they went their own path on an evolution, like they went their own evolutionary pathway, and we went on ours. Okay, there's a lot of the same genes in us that are found in like animals across the animal kingdom. They are called Hox genes. They are used for development. We have the same genes, but they help turn on genes that build our body plan. So it's like used for body plan. Okay, I know I didn't do a very great job with that, but at least you can get the notes and read through it, and hopefully it helps. But we will dive more in depth when after MCA testing.